Aha. Okay. So I think the technical problems with the projector are under control. Can you guys close the door at the back, please? Thank you.
Maybe not.
Okay.
Doesn't want to close.
You have to open the. No, we're not in. Okay, welcome to the co-working group. I thought I might have a co-chair today, but maybe will come later. I'm Carsten Bormann, this is the co-working group. Can anybody join the Jabber? I'm not sure we'll need an actual Jabber scribe, but somebody should just listen to it. Hannes probably can listen to it. I think he has a working Jabber installation. This is an IETF meeting, note well and everything. Read this now. Thank you. And I think by Thursday most people have read it. This is the agenda. I have prepared some of the names are wrong, sorry about that. But those of you who right, can you circulate the bushes? We need a note taker. I'm sorry, I missed that one. Ari, you are in the first row. So that is like you volunteered for note taking. We'll find someone for tomorrow. Thank you. Okay, so we have a little bit of a problem because a number of the people who are instrumental for some of the work items are only here today. So this is the first time we have this problem to this extent. So we will try to cram most of the things in today. And then we have a couple of things we will have a little bit more relaxed time to talk about tomorrow. Which is a little bit strange because the HTTP 12 mapping is a working group document, so it's probably something that should get high priority. Any comments on the agenda?
This is Akbar. I just checked the slides for the Friday.
Yeah?
They're still incorrect. So.
Okay, so send me the fixes and I will fix them before.
Okay, but I already sent it to you, but I'll resend it to you.
Resend them to me because apparently I was using the wrong one.
Simon Lemay, I didn't see anything about co-op over TCP and alternate transport.
TCP is in alternate
okay.
transport. Yes.
Okay.
The slide should be in there.
Oh, I didn't see them in version.
Yeah, I have updated the slides about 10 times since that. So maybe the presenters can check whether they are in the current. Okay, any other comments on the agenda? Then let me quickly look through the working group status. There is one document that is kind of stuck at the moment because there is a very, very lazy shepherd with a microphone in his left hand right now, and we will fix it after this meeting. The other working group documents block has just completed working group last call, and we're looking for a shepherd. Somebody is nodding there, that's very useful. And we will talk about these two documents tomorrow. We'll talk about resource directory today. And we probably should be talking about core interfaces at some point in time. We had a lunch of the Thing research group today. And we had the slightly weird idea to actually take this document and make this into a research group work item.
Zach Shelby. Huh?
Because it really is documenting design patterns.
Yeah, but they're design patterns that we use every single day, right now. They're very useful. So I think we need to, that's a stable document that people are using all over the place. We need to publish it.
Okay, I think the main problem is that many people seem to think these are the only design patterns you can use with Chrome.
Okay, fair enough. We can improve the document to make it clear that these are some RESTful design patterns that you may use. But I mean, that's an educational problem for people to understand what's REST. How can you use protocol, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
So there's likely to be a design pattern document from the research group at some point. So if you want to publish it before that, I don't have a problem with that.
yeah. So I've asked Michael Koster to take over as an editor for this document, and I think that's a good idea for the working group because I don't have the time to maintain it as well as I'd like to. So I think we can get speed on that. So I'd propose that we just get it done. If there's something that's unclear or missing, let's just fix it. And then if you want to do research on more design guidelines, etc., that's okay. But
Okay. Any other comments on this? Because that's essentially the only time we will talk about this document during this meeting.
The Zach part, since I wasn't sure what document you and Zach were talking about, can you be explicit because the light?
Interfaces?
Okay. And what was the relation to the design patterns? I didn't catch that.
The
Sorry.
interfaces document essentially documents some design patterns and gives names to them, which is probably the useful part when you want to finish it.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay, so we will do this in a two-tiered way, finish this document and not try to add new stuff to it, but just finish it as it is with an appropriate disclaimer at the start. This is just documenting some ways of doing this, and then we will maybe look at the larger picture in the research. Okay, so that's the status of the working group. Documents. I would like to pick one specific document that is not a working document right now, which is the COCO document, the congestion control. We have had several meetings where we discussed this here, and we essentially the document is essentially stable. However, we said we want to get some more experience with it. And so that there were no changes to it since we last discussed it, but the research was continued. And there also was a presentation in the Internet Congestion Control Research Group this week. Now, that doesn't have a stock of labels they can put on documents and say, this is okay, this is fine, because in the end we will only find out by using this document on a wider scale. But it seemed like the research group was reasonably happy with what they found. There were no roadblocks identified. So that's maybe a document that we could adopt here and finish. So I see one head nodding. So who has read a version of this document? That's about 5 people. Who has implemented it? Matthias has implemented it, or at least it's part of his implementation now. Okay. Yeah, I think this is about the usual amount of interest we get. So I take it from yes.
then maybe it's Matthias Kovac, ETH Zurich, more input on this. So the co-author of the paper where we implemented that and made it publicly available, we got actually interest from other research groups, so they wanted to rerun the experiments and continue from there, and there's active interest in that, so that's what I can add.
Good. So asking whether we want to adopt it doesn't mean it's done. It means in the best case we are going to adopt it and then work on it and then it will be done. So I think that's consistent with the state we have. So the take-home message from me is we are going to ask on the waiting list whether we should adopt it. What else is going on? Campaign.
Yeah, company. So just for the adoption, I checked priority. Last time we discussed about the priority. For this one, it belongs to no priority. So maybe we can postpone a little bit.
I think it will be low priority after adoption as well. It's not something that has to be done next week. Okay, so what else is going on? There is an ACE working group which is supposed to do authentication and authorization for constrained environments. They're currently stuck on some informational documents, but there is some spillover. Hannes wants to say something.
I just don't like the stuck terminology. I think it just took us a little bit longer to get going. I think that's maybe a fault on estimating the time properly and how long it takes to get these things done. Had the group followed my recommendations originally, we wouldn't be in that mess because there wouldn't be a use case document.
Yeah, I think we can learn something from that. Now the problem here in this case is that we actually procured work from academics and it's not very nice to tell them, thank you for writing this document, but we are not going to publish it. So that probably was the original mistake. Anyway, so maybe this should have said so far was stuck, and now it seems to gain speed again. So we'll see what happens, and we actually have a spillover from the ACE group into core. DICE is kind of finishing the DTLS profile. There's not much to say about that. It's very consistent with what we have done here with DTLS. The multicast work will probably need some rethinking. So it's not clear whether we will have a multicast security solution out of DICE at all. The Jose working group has built JSON object signing and encryption set of documents. And it now looks like there will be a CBOR version of that. So it's probably not in the Jose working group because it's just different constituents. People who come from the web world want to do OpenID Connect and so on probably are not the same people who want to do this. But this might go ahead, and that might be a good building block for us to use. Then a thing-to-thing research group has started meeting at this IETF, and we have found three areas of interest we want to focus on right now: the security and lifecycle issue, the issue of how to actually use REST, and that's where with this design pattern work would come in, and some long-term aspects in management. Of course, we don't want to redo the work that's being done here on management, but I think it's a good idea to have a more long-term view on management. So this is a resource we actually can use in both directions. So work we have been doing here, but we are not quite sure how to continue. Let's push that to the research group. They can find out. And work that actually requires some research. Coco would have been an example, but that is kind of done. We can go to the research group and say, folks, find some researchers who look on this and maybe get some results. So that's an additional resource. And finally, the lower layers are increasingly talking about security, and there will be an ad hoc meeting at 7 p.m. today in Pavilion So if you are interested in network security, that will be a useful meeting. So in total, if you look at this slide, a little bit of a pattern emerges. I mean, this is security, 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 and security. So, really.
Nice type. I'm glad that you did not have a green bullet below 60s and 6 low with the word stuck on it, because we're not.
Thank you. Yeah, you could spend the whole meeting reporting on all these activities. I just wanted to set the pointers so people know where to look. Okay, that was my introduction. So we can go into the agenda, and the first item is COMI. So it may seem a little bit strange that we are doing COMI before the recharter discussion, but maybe it's actually a good idea to talk about the content first and then talk about where to put it in the channels.
And I use this.
Yeah. And you have to stand in the big box because it was last year. Big box.
Oh. I can't move anymore. Okay, good. I want to present COMI. I already did it on the last IETF meeting, so it will be pretty short, I think. So the first one is the title. En die bierman, Jörg Schoonwalder, aan nu ik zeg dan zitten. The motivation is to transport over co-op between clients to access standardized resources specified in SMILE or YOUNG to do this management. Okay, what do you want to do is you want to do statistic about the performance, so getting values of how things are behaving in your device, and also you want to initialize parameters probably. So the two things are done, and this is also supported by Netcom. We have the wish that we can transport very small payloads, so that the communication will be short and effective for the small devices, and there will be, that's one thing. And the other is that you use co-op and use also the security recommendations and protocols which are used there. So the idea is that we have already standardized all the YOUNG language we'll use, and we'll use all the software which is probably already available within your small device. What is the state? We currently have version 6, which has been published, I think, a month ago. It is a version, the former versions also be aligned with RESTConf, only it is small and it uses co-op instead of HTTP, and it is a reduced set of options. What we want to use also is a seaboard payload, that is again to make the payload smaller. We have used hashes for name strings because names can be rather long because they are expletive of what you're going to do, and so we reduce them by making a hash function. I will give an example later on. The discovery is not only the discovery of your resources which are there, but it is also the structure of the resources, and we have, and similar to Netconf, RESTconf, we use this a file somewhere else where you can look at the structure of the parameters. The access granularity, so it's not only resource but also parts of resources, and we have a dependence on block and observe, so we try to reuse what is already there. This is a small, still standing. A small overview, so you have the specification, which is a YOUNG description, and what is nice, that also SMILE v2 can be transferred into YOUNG. So if you have all the old MIPS, etc., you can, these descriptions in SMILE, you can do to YOUNG and you can reuse them. But it's not only true for, it's also true for Netconf, of course. Yeah. We have network packets, we use DTLS, as is used, promoted by co-op for the security. And the YOUNG description prescribes the variables which are down here. So all the descriptions of the variables, the relations are up there, which can be interrogated by an application. And down below, we just have the variables and with their values. Any questions? No. The profiles, and here, the path The pass is /mg. mg is recommended if people want to use another pass name start, then it can be done because it can be set. The resource type is core management, and immediately after mg we have the /hash, which goes you immediately to the resource that you want to access. We have the module set URI, which looks at the description, and URI, which is where the specification is stored. And we have these young hashes, and the hashes you may have conflicts, and when there are conflicts, these conflicts are stored in that part so that you can find them and adapt your application to the clash. So here an example, you can have system, clock, current, day, time. You take the whole string, and you make a hash. The same thing you do with the system state clock, that is a hash. So all those system clock, current, day, time is part of a system state clock. The hashes are independent, so you can use it. So these different ones are then transferred to hashes, are going to a 30-bit number. To put them in the URI, we use in base B64 representation, the second version of the table which has been published. In the JSON descriptions we have in the examples, we use an hexadecimal representation, but for that one we use an unsigned integer in CBOR to transport the hashes. We have, or better, Andy has done on all the young objects that he knows, he has applied the hash function, and he has not met any, clashes. So that looks good. Yes.
And it's on the hash function. So in the other specifications we have SHA-256.
It's not a cryptographic hash. It's not a cryptographic hash.
Okay.
It's just to be able to use a shorter identifier. So can you go back 2 slides? You had this collisions table, I think. No, 1 slide, sorry.
Okay, I see. You pre-compute those. Okay. So you put them into the specification then, or it's not computed in runtime. That's what you're saying.
Most computed runtime, it's computed before.
Okay.
So once you have the descriptions and specifications, the names are already fantastically known.
Okay.
To calculate the hashes can download it in the device down low.
Got it.
They don't know about the names because they only know about the hashes. The hashes are transported, so that gives you the relation. Yep.
This is Barry. The point to take from what Hannes just said is you need to be very clear in the document that this is not a cryptographic hash. It's only used for the purpose you're using it for, so you don't get pushback from the security area later.
Okay, I see. Thanks. Okay, so this is a new part which is added in version 6 with respect to version 5. So we can have rehashing. So clashes between servers are irrelevant because you only access the hashes in that server from the client, and if you go to another server for another module with the same hash ones, that is not really important because the client can discern. It is the clashes within the server which are important. However, when a clash happens, it has to be notified with a rehash, and it is explained how we can then actually notify in the one of the resources how this rehash has been done, so that a client can see that he has to apply the rehash. The rehash can be necessary because you load different modules, and although no clash happens in the module, a set of modules can have a rehash, so you do not know at compilation time that a clash has occurred, so it happens actually. Okay. Then we have a key query parameter. A young data node has one instance, but not for the list. In the list you can have several instances, and they are identified by a key, which is specified in the specification. Oh dear. And each one has a unique key. And so you can, with the key query parameter, you can actually select the list item that you want, which is actually quite similar to what SNMP provides. The discovery. So the managed server, I repeat myself, only knows the source code. The names are present in the young module server. So the application looks at the specification and knows what are the relations and can handle accordingly. However, the device, the target, does not know all these things. Yeah? And their module provides a link to the IETF Young library, which is quite standardized within NetConf and RESTConf. Oh yeah, and this, Andy is not too happy about it. You have all these hash values which are generated, and you can actually add them in a well-known core, and then you can see a list of hash values, but this may be not very useful. But it is consistent with what is known core is useful. What do we still have to do? We still want text on the LWM2M. What are the differences so that people can realize what the differences are, but it's also for us to see if they can maybe adapt or make sure. The same for the IPSO management. I recently heard that reference. Yes, thanks. There is one thing that when you have resources, you want to access parts of resources, and for that you need patch. We still have to introduce that we are going to use patch, and I will come to that a bit later. There will be more text on the block, because block is a service which is there, but it's not always easy to understand how to use it, so we will try to explain that. A select option will be done so that you can select a subset of a resource on certain parameter values. And we have to look at extended error code specifications. And once that is done, we hope that it is a nice document which can be used. Yep.
So any questions or comments on the management part of the slot? Okay. So maybe you can continue with the patch part.
Yep. Happy to. Patch is well known already from HTTP. The put method, I mean, this is almost a quote from the patch RFC. You have to exist the override resource completely and cannot do small changes. For core, you have to do small changes. And because we do not want to have a complete resource transported, if we only want to do small changes, patch is fantastic. So, we have to specify then patch for co-op. And we have produced a document. I must say, the document is not a real Chinese copy from the RFC, but we have lots of references to it, and we have made all the things which are applicable to co-op, we have spelled out as far as I know. And what we still have to do, open topics in it, are the use of the error codes, because the treatment is slightly different, so we have to look at different error codes, how they are returned in the co-op context. We have to see what kind of formats are going to be supported, and if a format is not supported, what are we going to do about it? And something which is not specified in this document, but is though in the HTTP patch, there is an accept document that you can say which formats you want. And we didn't know if we wanted to add it or not add it. So, if anyone wants to react to that, I will be happy to hear.
Somewhere in Bremen, Carsten Bormann, somewhere in Bremen, a bright young grad student is sitting and chanting, "I told you so, I told you so, I told you so." We were, we were thinking about putting patch into the base specification because we kind of saw sooner or later people are going to need it. And then we said, well, right now we don't have the use case yet, so let's keep things simple. And it's not a surprise that it's coming up. So the HTTP people needed it, and we will need it sooner or later. But there is some work to be done. So,
in my naivety, I thought that also the LWM2M people would need it if they only selected how do you call it, an instance of a management device, because you have the whole resource and you have the instances, and I thought, well, maybe they want it as well.
So Zach Shelby, I mean, you can structure your URI path, so your REST pattern, so you can simply select the part of your collection based on how deep you go into your paths. And it's very simple. It doesn't need anything from a patch. Where patch becomes interesting is when you have collections that you want to modify, insert things into, partially update. That's when it gets interesting. Might have a use in resource directory. I have these link collection needs. We'll talk about that in a moment. It could be a place to apply that if it's done. But if it's not ready, then we won't do it because we need to publish. So it's kind of a chicken egg problem we have.
Matthias Kovac, yeah, I would agree on that. So if we want to have it suddenly now, we really have to rush it, which might be bad because we don't get it right. But if we get it, for instance, after RD, there are lots of cases where already the registration, and if you want you to update, for instance, you have new links on your device, that would be a patch because it's again a collection. I mean, before we had put there, then there were these issues because put is supposed to replace the whole thing. Then now we settled, okay, let's do a post. So then the server does some magic to the representation or to the resource and applies that. Patch would make it a bit more explicit. But yeah, we would need it fast. So either do it now before RD, or I don't know. I don't know at what point it becomes useful if only a super small set actually uses that because it came too late.
Yes, Zach Shelby. So the use case for patch in RD is pretty narrow. It actually doesn't have to do with the device registration. You're really just adding links pretty slowly on your device. What it has to do is if a third party is allowed to add, for example, meta relationships related to devices, from the outside, let's say some kind of management entity, then you get into a situation you might have fairly long lists of links and you have to insert one or delete modify one, and it may make sense. That said,
what we want to do, yes.
Yeah, but that said, we can design a way to do this using just REST without patch, right? It's not impossible. So I think we do have to make a call on what do we think is feasible for completing patch, what do we think the timeline is, and do we want to take the risk to make COMI and RD dependent on that work? Because our track record for getting stuff shipped to RFC isn't great.
There is no security dependency of patch.
It has nothing to do with security. Our bandwidth is one RFC at a time, right? That's what we can handle. Seems, I mean, that.
Matthias Kovac again. Then maybe just a question to the previous topic. So because I saw you have this flat resource hierarchy, and now I see why you need a patch there. I had this question in my mind, why don't you go deeper or have a more detailed resource path? There it is, so you can have it there, but then it gets too long. I guess that's the...
And also you have the different instances, and you want to go onto the instances with the list, etc. Andy, you have some more experience with that.
But could you use these hashes just in the URI?
Yeah, the hash is in the URI.
Okay, so you can go in there.
This is
okay.
MG hash.
Okay.
Yeah, Andy Bierman. For COMI, the data is dictated from the Yang module, and anytime you want to change two siblings at once, you need patch. Otherwise, you're going to need two requests, and that completely changes the nature of patch, because it has to be done all or nothing. So rather than replace the entire parent resource, you can change more than one thing at once.
Yeah, so maybe staying compatible with RESTconf, the HTTP version, is a pretty good reason to actually do this here. And I mean, we have a HTTP patch document we can just copy, so it's not that much work, but thank you.
Yeah, Kaponi. So for the patch operation, so if we want to do the partial update, why can't we use the block? For example, we can divide the resource into several blocks and then just update one block or two blocks, something like that.
As Andy just explained, it is in the Young specification, and if you want to do, what was it, two instances, two
Sibling nodes.
Thanks, yeah, the terminology. Two sibling nodes simultaneously, then you have to use patch, otherwise you have to take the whole resource, etc. So it is especially in the definition of a resource with respect to the Young specification.
Okay, so it seems we should be doing patch. It's not as clear that we want to put a dependency between patch and resource directory. So we probably have to discuss that one on the list.
Because I think we want to put the patch into the COMI draft.
Yeah. I think it should be separate documents like the HTTP.
I quite agree there, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Otherwise it gets a bit hidden.
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
I think we already had this discussion, so we can just skip it now. It's a little bit more. So I'm going to talk about the resource directory draft, and then we're going to have a guest speaker, surprise guest speaker halfway through. We did not manage to submit 03 for this IETF. That was our goal from the last IETF, but we didn't manage to get all the changes implemented. But luckily, we still know what we're doing, and we're going to get some extra resources to help us make more timely updates to the document. So that's been our issue. And the way we're going to do that is by adding a couple authors. So Michael Koester, who has been contributing to this, is involved with lightweight M2M and other uses of RD, has agreed to become our editor of this document for the working group. So Michael, thank you very much. As well as Peter Vanderstock. So Peter has, for a much longer time, been contributing DNSSD work, examples for lighting, the group functionality. Much of that came from Peter, so we're adding Peter as an author at the same time in 03. So with that, I'm going to let Michael continue this and come up and tell us about some of the changes we have planned.
You press the button for end of presentation.
I pressed one of the buttons that was next to the other button that I was supposed to press. There we go. So we're adding a lighting example with as a use case for the group interface. And we're adding a lightweight M2M, an example for lightweight M2M as a use case for how RD is used in OMA lightweight M2M. We're also building a link collection interface so that the set of links that's registered can be managed as a collection. And so the idea is to be able to, as Zach said, to add additional metadata that further describes the context of the installation of the sensor. And to do that, we'll basically define how the function template for the REST interface for a collection. It's a fairly standard interface. The GET is going to be used to inspect the contents of the collection. There will be a way to add a link, remove a link, or replace a link. I don't think we're going to go so far as to edit things within a link. And right, we haven't really done a lot of the design yet, so we're looking, any input would be great as to how the design should work, but we probably will use batch for that.
Oops. Yep, that worked as
I
well.
don't even know what I'm doing. Okay. Okay, so the other issue we looked at was simple directory discovery, which is in there. There's some interesting things about simple directory discovery. For review, there's a way to do what we call simple directory discovery, where the endpoint does a post to the well-known core resource of the RD. And a post of an empty, with an empty payload to the well-known core of the RD indicates that the RD should do a get of the linked payload from the endpoint. A post containing the link format indicates that that the device should be registered. But the problem with that is there's no way to manage the lifetime of the link collection on the RD. There's basically no. Right now, when you register, there's LT that you use as a query parameter and some other things, and there's really no way to do that. There's no way to do a registration update or to indicate that the lifetime of this collection should be extended. So it's sort of just going to live on the RD forever, and we didn't know, how is that actually managed? Now maybe, yeah, I don't know. So unless there's a strong use case, we'd recommend that not be included in RD, that be removed for the next draft. Okay.
Zach Shelby, just to add some color to that, there is a way to do this, and it's through a kind of commissioning tool. So we have the ability to register resources on behalf of a third, behalf of an endpoint. And you absolutely could do that, right? You could have a commissioning tool that just scans the network, discovers devices, and registers them all with the directory. So we might do an example, for example, of how to do that.
Right, so as alternate functionality that does what this was intended to accomplish, we could show how the collection tool and maybe the link commissioning tool and the link collection management interface could be used to provide alternate functionality. So, when are we done? We want to be done with this. So we're going to do one more round of editing round, the draft 03, with covering these known issues. It's part of the charter that's being proposed already. And three expert reviews, and at least one from OMA to make sure that we're correctly providing what's needed for the interworking there with OMA lightweight M2M. I guess that's all.
Okay, I think we have to take this removal of the simple stuff to the list to find out whether there are people not in this room who are actually using that functionality. And I think the rest is pretty straightforward. So when do you think this draft will be available?
Well, we'll probably need to allow a little while for people to respond on the use case for that one.
So you want to send out a call for contributions and
yeah, so
okay.
So we should allow a few weeks for that maybe, and then do some editing.
Okay.
So I guess maybe 5 or 6 weeks would be.
Okay, so mid-May would be the time when this is submitted. And who is willing to review this document when it's available in mid-May? 1, 2. Ari, can you take down the names? Matthias, Akbar, what's your name? Sorry. Okay, good. Thank you.
Darshak.
Good. So this would be at least 3 reviews. And do we have an OMA contact that we will be using? Okay. So that would be then probably in preparation for working group last call?
Hopefully, yes.
Okay.
That's the goal. To get it done.
Is Thomas here? Thomas is the next one on the agenda.
So we have a small problem. We found a small problem in the spec, a special case where you want to do certificate mode security, crowd security, and you don't have DNS set in, and you're in trouble basically. It may sound a bit crazy, but actually, really?
Speak up.
Oh. So, rephrasing. We discovered this small problem in a spec at the intersection of RFC 7252, the SNI definition in RFC 6066, and the PKIX document.
You have a slide on that.
Yeah.
Oh.
Okay, yeah. These are the three musts that we must actually follow. And basically, if you don't have DNS in your network, then you're screwed, because you actually need to have a fully qualified domain name in order to fit into the certificate subject alternative name, into the SNI host name, and etc. So basically what we discovered is that certificate mode is not compatible with the DNS-free deployments.
So Martin has a comment on that?
So Martin Thompson, I had a problem with the problem statement, because we do this all the time in WebRTC with no real trouble. You need to be a little bit more precise about the trouble that you're experiencing. And I think I know what you're talking about, but yeah.
Do you mind if I respond to Martin? So in the way so for co-op and for many of those deployments, the idea is that you would support the model where you have the IoT device talking to some cloud service, and the cloud service uses typically, like today, has a certificate with a FQDN in there, and everything is great. So co-op intention is that it doesn't depend on DNS for the naming, but then also envision scenarios to be used where you have a more peer-to-peer nature. Devices like in this room who are not dynamically updating data in the DNS should then also be used. And then the question showed up is in context of the DTLS profile document on how would that work with what we had written in the specifications today? And that's what the document is about. So it appears to us, and I'm happy to see feedback from others in the room who have tried to solve some of those peer-to-peer cases on how that linkage between sort of the discovery mechanism of those services, the stuff that goes into the certificate, and the stuff that is supposed to go into co-op actually lines up. And we believe that there's some inconsistency there, and we are soliciting feedback on that.
I look at that set of, Andrew McGregor, I look at that set of requirements and ask myself, does a multicast DNS whatever.local address count as an FQDN? Because if it does, just put that in there.
So those maybe the term, the title of the slide is misworded, because those are the existing sort of RFC 2119 language from the different documents that we sort of co-op and etc. and the subsequently included. If you put the multicast DNS, multicast IP address into the DNS.
Not multicast address, but IP address, but a multicast DNS name, as in foo.local, into that field. Does that qualify sufficiently close to an FQDN for this to resolve? Now, we can then construct that name from something in the co-opverse such that every host has a name. Problem solved, surely.
Interesting idea. Interesting idea. I don't know, I would have to think that through, whether that's a good idea to put those in certificates and then compare it. But I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, there's actually, I just wanted to come back to the kind of, I know we like to do these technical things that, oh, we were solving a problem because all these things, but what we were trying to achieve in the first place was simply for an endpoint that does not have a stable DNS name, we need the ability to put its endpoint identifier in a certificate. And our intention writing 7252 was that that should be put in the subject somehow. And we knew at that time that there are some technical difficulties with that, right? If you're either stretching the use of subject or we don't actually have a registered type with this type of subject name. So I think this is a good idea, but I think we want to just keep it simple. Find a way to create this type of subject name, which is an endpoint name. Okay, but is that your goal, right? Okay.
In response to that, so that would be great. It's just a question on like what is the semantic then? So if you would use, for example, EUI 64 and put that into the subject name or subject alt name, then the co-op S says you compare the co-op S URI with what is in the certificate. So presumably those two line up. Maybe that's that creates something meaningful at the end. I don't know. Does it? Have people actually tried to construct some scenarios and found that there's any meaningful security that comes out of it?
Actually, just to answer that, so there are some issues with peer-to-peer, absolutely. Like device to device, we might need to do a little bit of work, and it might have to do with ACE a little bit, right? But when we're in resource directory scenarios where we are registering with resource directory, it has a URI that we can match its certificate to, all good. But the other way around, when we mutual authenticate the device, what we're doing is actually checking that, are you the endpoint name that you're claiming to be, right? It's got to be in your certificate, it's got to match. So it's not just about EUI 64s, right? These endpoint names could be, there's many different types of stable identifiers. It's just a string. Now that works for that scenario. Now when you do peer-to-peer, we have to figure out, all right, well, when you discover this peer and try to communicate it, how do you find out what its endpoint name is supposed to be? What do you expect? And if you can get that, it's pretty easy to match this up.
Too tall to take. So Martin Thompson, the concern that I have here is that all of the existing certificate-based authentication mechanisms rely on the one basic principle, that is, before you initiate communication, before you even start looking for host names or whatever it is through DNS, you have some idea of what it is that you're looking for. And the problem with discovery situations is that you don't actually have an idea of what it is that you're looking for before you start to initiate that communication. And you may be able to solve this for situations like the resource directory. Once you actually have that initial contact with someone, they can start telling you about various other things, and they can give you things to expect to see. I certainly wouldn't recommend we start shoving IP literals into certificates that just doesn't work. They change. But the resource directory can do that. But you still need a way of getting to the resource directory in a secure fashion, knowing that the resource directory is the resource directory you actually intended to get to. And you have effectively a bootstrapping problem here. And so it comes down to making some sort of assessment when you actually finally retrieve that certificate, whether or not the thing that you got is not only something that you trust in the sense that it chains up to a root that is in your trust store, but it is also something that you were expecting to get to, because it might be that I want to go to example.com, but example.net has intercepted the communications, and it's quite capable of proving that it's example.net, but it is not the light switch you're looking for. Just use domain names.
quickly answer that sexually. So we're okay with the talking to the resource directory and finding it, Martin. So we actually have a bootstrap mechanism to securely configure the URIs for your resource directories, and we're kind of okay on that side. But we definitely have an issue on an endpoint that doesn't have that. It only has an endpoint identifier. How do we bind that to the certificate? And then in peer-to-peer, how do we actually discover and get that out of the resource directory? So we do have a little bit of work to do. So I think this is valuable work. We should do this.
Robert Craigie. So in step 2, the way we did it was we didn't really use URIs in certificates, and we used a thumbprint of the certificate as part of the device name, which we then used DNS, SD, and MDNS, and that's how you discover those devices. And you can always validate the certificate based on this shortened device identifier, we called it.
In the subject.
Yes, certificate thumbprint. We actually used a thumbprint and then turned that into a device identifier, a shortened form, and then that was advertised as part of the name of the device. Well, this is thumbprint.
Yeah. Today it would probably be a raw public key then.
But what was in the certificate was the EUI64 of the device, so that was a unique idea.
But I have to agree with Hannes that the scenario you just have described is exactly what raw public key was invented for.
Yeah.
You don't need a certificate for that.
Yeah, it's a sort of an empty shell, but at that time, in fairness to the SIG-PIP work, at that time the raw public key didn't exist, the document. So it's great to hear that Martin and Sagden agreed that there's an issue. Maybe we need a better way to describe this. One part is the description of the problem, which was sort of difficult to describe because it relates to all sorts of factors. And the other one is what is actually a solution to it, and that's why the document, maybe the title, even wording the title was a little bit complicated, because we thought that since we already have RD, that would be a suitable mechanism to start with, rather than coming up with yet another discovery mechanism. So I would be happy to talk to some people like Robert, who just proposed something from the SIG-PIP, or others who have looked into that and want to, with us, go through that sort of thought process, because it appears a little complicated.
Kerry Lynn, and I just want to note that we have a very similar problem to this in DNSSD. I think a significant difference between the RD and the DNS is that people assume that the DNS has a human in the loop at some point. So that chain of trust extends all the way back to some administrator at some point, and I think that's almost the basis of trust in today's, in today's scheme. So when you have a scheme where machines can add their own information to a directory, that's what I think is the challenge here.
So Martin Thompson, the formulation of the problem statement, I think, is quite attractive at sort of drawing out these sort of things. Maybe all this really needs is, in addition to the set of trust anchors that people are willing to chain certificates up to, is a set of names that they're willing to talk to for the purposes of, the resource directory is obviously a candidate for that. You've got a secure mechanism for ensuring that devices are configured with one of those. That would be sufficient. You bootstrap in the name of that, and you can use that as then the means to do it. And you think about how people use the web today. I will type in www.searchengine.com into my browser, and that is the basis from which I then go to that site, authenticate that site. It provides me with another HTTPS URI. I follow that link, so on and so forth, and it sort of chains on from there. If we have that one or set of initial hooks for this and a means to follow those links properly, then we can avoid the sort of issues that you're talking about here. The only question then is, how do you represent those identities in a certificate? And it might mean that you need new types of subject alt names. It might mean that you need new ways of expressing those sorts of things. But that's a solvable problem. We can deal with that. You might have to go talk to the PKIX working group and whatever else. But those are actually solvable problems.
To Dave Robin, to follow on with the name though, the reason I jumped up here is yes, you know you're looking for somebody called trustme.local, and you find a certificate that says that, whether that's in the alternate or wherever that is, that's what he asserts to be. That's great, but that's useless without actual CA chaining back to something that you can trust. Anybody can assert any name, so names are useless. The only thing that works is the CA that you have in your root that you're willing to trust. Because if you present me a certificate, if you're not chained to something that I've got built into me that says, yes, I trust that, then forget the name or where it's stored or anything. I don't trust you.
So, thanks, Shelby. So just coming back to this presentation, which we'll let you get on with in a moment, what we wrote in 7252 was actually very specific, where you need to put a stable identifier in the subject, in particular the subject alt name. And we punted a little bit because we knew there was not a subject alt name type for this. So we knew there was a problem, and I think we actually asked you guys to work on it back then, 2 years ago. So it's good you got around to it eventually. Or I remember at least we need to register a subject alt name for this. Everything else ties together very nicely. I think endpoint name is the right way to do this. We already have that in the resource directory. Every time you look up any link, even though the link itself has :// IP address, you always know the endpoint name ahead of time before you go contact the device. So if we just have, a subject alt name for this and some instructions, right? A little bit better than that about how to use it, I think we're in good shape.
Can I fix that sentence for you? If you want to do certificate mode DTLS and you don't have DNS, then maybe you don't want to do certificate mode DTLS, but raw public key mode.
So, Martin Thompson again. One final note. I just reviewed a document that came out of Radext that did a discovery mechanism for Radius. And there, the names that they have to bootstrap off are the NAIs. And actually, it's the realm and the NAI that they use. And they have minted a new subject alt name type to carry that information. It's not a DNS name. It looks like one, but you shove it in the certificate. This is not a hard thing to do. So all you need to do is be very precise about what it is that you need to put in there and how you validate that, and then you have what you need. And I think that's the way to proceed.
So who's going to do that? Okay.
Right, so I think I'm done because this is
Thank
what
you.
we wanted. We wanted this discussion.
That was very useful.
The time is
finding out how to carry this information.
I think that the conclusion was to find out what exactly we want to do and then do that. And that is assigned to the authors of this draft. So the most likely it's actually another subject alt name interpretation that we are going to generate. Okay, rechartering. I think one of the results of IETF 91 was this wiki page, which is the backlog of the core working group. Well, this is a snapshot that's a couple of months old. And well, the interesting thing is that there are several items here that actually are not in our charter today.
This is just for the notes, is that we talked about the working group stuff?
This is the recharter item, yeah. So we are in this item here. So I generated a charter that didn't generate any discussion here, and it's probably not particularly useful to read it from the slides here. I still put it on the slides so people can at least glimpse what's on here. So there's a lot of explanatory stuff before that. The first piece of content in that charter is this paragraph, which says we're going to do maintenance. And I think that's a good thing to do because it's new technology and we will need to do some maintenance. But we will not invent a reliable multicast solution. I think that's important to have in any kind of charter by any kind of vertical. We're not going to invent a reliable multicast solution. Then the next thing is the alternative transport area. We will talk about that later. So this now has an explicit part in the charter. In particular, it does mention non-IP, but it also mentions that to complete the non-IP thing, we need to have some idea of how to do security over non-IP. Particularly, we still don't have a complete security solution for SMS. So I don't know whose charter to do that. Hannes has a document for that, but DTLS over SMS.
So it was actually with Thomas, and I don't know where he went, but that was, I presented it, or we presented it at the last IETF meeting, and it appeared after the discussion, I don't know which group it was, it appeared after the discussion that the actual content, the underlying problem is actually something that we already cover in the DTLS profile document. Okay. And so it became the core message got included in the DTLS, in the main body and main part of the DTLS profile document, which talks about the retransmission timers. And then the relevant text was copied into the appendix of that document that talks that is more about some details on how to do that and what it means from a retransmission behavior and so on. So I think that document is in some sense, or that issue is resolved in that sense, that we should have declared the other document, the independent document, dead. So the relevant parts have been extracted and generalized.
We still need an encapsulation and we need a UI scheme.
That's true. That's that's not. I don't
You can
think
do
it.
that here.
Yeah, I don't think it would. That would not be good in the DTLS document. So that's true.
So the text here is still correct because DICE is doing the profile part and we would do the UI scheme and the encapsulation part. Well,
Carson, just a clarification, this Akbar. When you say perform maintenance, so I had a request from Abidjan for the no response. He had that no response ID. So does that fall under maintenance, or is that like new features, new co-op options headers? Where would that fall? Just a clarification.
Good question. So for instance, the patch thing we just talked about, that would be an obvious maintenance thing because it's something that we pushed out when we did the original document, and it turns out we cannot push out it any longer. While the no response thing, there was lots of discussion about the REST implications of that and so on. So I think at the last IETF we actually said this was one place where we would want to use another avenue, which is that you actually can register options for co-op. So I think we have a way to do this kind of work, but we don't necessarily have to do it in this work group.
Okay, but the maintenance word, maybe it's a bit limiting, like for recharter, I think. Could we find a better word to allow, like...
I was trying to keep this pretty rubbery.
There is precedent for using that word. The name of TCP/M, the M is maintenance, and they do lots of complicated stuff to TCP. So I think that's relevant.
Okay, so so just to clarify, because even when we get to the HTTP co-op proxy draft, there's some open issues that may be solved by new options, may be solved by new headers, may be solved by something that requires changes to co-op. So just to be explicit, and I guess if we have it in the minutes, that would all funnel in maintenance. And
if you don't change anything, you don't have to do any maintenance. Yes. So yes, changing things is included.
Okay. And just because I have to answer Abidjan offline, the no response, you're saying actually it's just a matter of registration of option header, or it falls under maintenance?
That the registration path is opened by 7252. So assuming that all the conditions are fulfilled, people can register options and solve their problem that way. So we don't have to have every single option here in the working group. And one of the reasons this actually was created was to kind of sort things into things that should receive lots of attention in the working group, or maybe a little bit less attention in the working group, and things that probably are better on the registration track. We can revisit that discussion. It's just like the amount of support we got for the no response option always was a bit, oh, that's an interesting idea, but, and then there were like 20 observations how that is a bit difficult to do in the general case.
Okay, so I think that's fair. As long as we record it in the minutes, that'll be, I think it'll.
So what exactly?
I think your concern is that you're thinking of maintenance as fixing a leak in the loo, and that installing a new loo would not be maintenance. And we're saying that's not correct, that we would consider putting in a new loo to be maintenance. So what he wants you to have in the minutes is that significant additions to adding new features to the document would be included in maintenance.
Indeed, and that's what I was saying by mentioning TCP/AM. That's what they do.
Okay, that's the first paragraph. Then resource directory. That's one of the two main reasons why we have to do a recharter, because the old one explicitly said we're not doing that. And I think the main reason why it said that was that we didn't know how to marry this with DNSSD, and that we now do. So I thought it might be a good idea to mention that in the charter, that we are doing that. Then we have this could be called maintenance, but I wanted to call out explicitly, we have a couple of formats that we occasionally have to work on that are directly co-op related, like the link format, the group communication information. And second part of that paragraph, a lot of people want to do SendML. And it actually turns out we have had more mailing list discussion about SendML than about many other drafts that we are doing. So yeah, that's an interesting thing. So I want to call it out because sometimes people think the IETF doesn't do formats, and that's patently not true. But SendML is kind of an unusual format for the IETF.
Peter van der Stok, can you please clarify a bit where SendML is going? Because if I think about these things, I think about a set of devices which are developed and sold and which have specific properties. So will the SendML actually start describing all kinds of devices which are sold, and that will then be standardized? Is that the IETF? Is that what I must see? Conclude?
You can try to answer that question.
Zach Shelby, so one of the 3 SendML authors. SendML is really just a batch format. It's really not any more complicated than that. It says, all right, I have a bunch of stuff I want to send. Very simple representations, right? Maybe of temperature, for example. And I want to be able to package these up as a list, maybe with some time differences when they were measured, and dump it out in JSON or CBOR in a single response, right? And that's what people are using it for. It's actually used by the lightweight M2M specs as well. as the mechanism that they use to batch things up. So if you look at lightweight M2M, what they're actually doing to batch is using CenML. It's not called that because we haven't finished the spec, but it's actually that. So it's being used by other SDOs who are actually defining the more complex semantics, because CenML doesn't really define the semantics itself. It has a place for a unit, in case you have a unit, but that's it. There's no way to extend it to say this is the light control object or this is a building automation thing. There's nothing like that. There's no registries, there's no, and I would propose we don't go in that direction. Just keep it a batch form.
If I understand correctly, it is an abstraction of all the devices and a classification of devices which are then visible in the CenML specification?
It's not really about devices at all. It's about
Not at all.
measurements.
You just talk about sensors.
Yeah, so let me give an example. Let's say that I have a resource, a co-op resource, and it measures something. And CenML doesn't care what it is, right? You measure some value. Could be sensor blah. And you don't want to read that or send a notification every single time that value changes, right? Every millisecond, right? You might want to wait for several minutes, collect a couple hundred of blah, right, at different time periods, and then send those out in a single resource representation that has a few hundred values, right? And what CenML does is it simply lets you put all those values in one structure, and it has the time differences when they were recorded, there's a way to mark that with a unit, which might be blah. It just helps the people using it. That's all it's meant to be used for.
So I think I got confused by calling it a sensor.
Yeah, so what we will do is find a new abbreviation for this acronym, because it started out as a markup language, and that's kind of becoming less applicable. So one thing that actually has been discussed among the authors is to get rid of the XML part of it and just focus on the JSON and CBORD side. So that's certainly something that we would decide here whether that's a sensible thing to do, and then we can find out what the 5 letters CenML actually mean. Okay.
For the last item, why do you specifically want informational documents rather than standards track ones?
That's a good question.
Now, I would suggest that unless there is a specific reason you want to force them to be informational, that you let the working group decide that for each document.
Very good.
This Akbar, I agree with that, but I guess the historical reason maybe Carson put that is that the current HTTP co-op mapping proxy is informational, so maybe that was in the back of your mind when you put that.
Yeah, but Terry is right, that might change.
Yeah.
Carrie Lynn, I just want to add, if you ever want this to be referenceable by some other SDO, then you probably want to make it the standards track document, because they might have difficulty making it a normative
Other
standard.
SDOs don't understand the difference between standards track.
I can tell you from experience that they do.
Okay. Good point, thank you. Okay, so yeah, that's, I hope Ari has written that up. Now the next big thing here, we have, yeah. Just strike the word informational. The next big thing here is the mapping of RESTconf to CoAP. So the idea is the architecture is developed by the NetConf working group, but we spend energy on doing a specific mapping of that architecture to the constraint space, and of course the architecture will bend a little bit, change a little bit in the process, but we will stay within a good way of compatibility with the RESTconf work. So this will require close coordination with netconf and maybe other ops and management working groups. So that's the second new item. Then the whole interfacing with the security area. Okay, we will work with DICE. I don't know how long DICE will be around. We will work with TLS. We will work with CFRG. It's quite likely that we will at some point adopt different curves. And I think that's a very good place to cooperate with CFRG and with TLS to make sure we have the cipher suites available for that. We will cooperate with ACE, and we will cooperate with something, we don't know yet what that will be, doing the object security. Now, on the object security side, we actually may want to add something to COAP. We will talk about that in a couple of minutes. So it's important to have this also may need additions on the core side as part of the chart. But revisit all these things when we have discussed the specific items, but I think the general direction we can discuss today. And finally, we will do motherboard cooperation with other organizations. I have reviewed, the old charter had a long list of organizations. And of course, that list of organizations changes every week, so we shouldn't really try to capture a snapshot of who those organizations are. But partnering with other organizations like OMA and so on is our lifeblood here. So it's important to point that out. And the same is, of course, true within the IETF, where whatever additions to the constraint network, the constraint node network cluster is made will be our prime partners. Is that a charter we want to ask the ISG to approve? Peter, what's going to say?
Peter van der Stok again. The sleepy nodes, are they part of the maintenance?
Okay, that's a very loaded word.
Oh, sorry. The duty cycle devices, are they part of maintenance?
I think if you just restrict it to duty cycle, it's clearly maintenance. If you open the whole sleepy node thing, that's outside the scope of the IETF. And maybe there's something in between.
Okay. Fine. Maintenance then.
Zach Shelby. So I would claim that the COAP pub sub work creates an interaction model where that is no longer a problem. So I think
where is it?
It's on. Well, I mean, you haven't put the list of deliverables here, but I think if you look at that. But the COAP pub sub work, I mean, that was really meant to, remember that's an extension of what we did in mirror server, right? And we started doing mirror server to solve the problem of, hey, the origin server is not available, so we need to have a place to keep this information at all times. COAP pub sub is just a cleaner design for that, and it does solve the so-called sleepy node problem. Also in OMA lightweight MDOM, there's a queuing mechanism to deal with that for REST. Personally, I think we should stay away from all this low-level duty cycling stuff. It is such an overloaded, kind of dangerous area that I think we just shouldn't go there as an application layer working group. So do COAP pub sub and be done with it. That's my conclusion.
So we need a sentence on pub sub. Oh, it does.
You miscopy pasted your own charter.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Okay.
Peter van der Stok, I'm sorry, I'm a bit disappointed. I always thought that having nodes which do not respond, but will respond in the future, that you like to have something for it. We have done work on it. There has been questions in the working group. There have lots of drafts has been generated to look at this problem. And we thought it was the right place to do this here in core. And not quite sure what has happened now, if it has disappeared or that we all have to do publish subscribe to solve this problem. I'm not quite sure what has happened.
So, looking at the past, we had a number of proposals that weren't the right thing. So
there has been several reasons why they have been discontinued, yeah. Not only because they were not the right thing.
If we have a proposal that is the right thing, I would be very interested. And really, I mean, what PubSub does is provide us with additional interaction modes. And if we come up with good interaction modes that further advance the sleepy node area, that's great.
Okay, so fine. Might it be useful to put a phrase in that these kind of problems are part of the maintenance?
Yeah, I'm very careful, very weary with this term, sleepy node.
Okay. Well, might find some other term.
Yeah, maybe.
Okay, I'll try to think of a term, and then I hope we may include it. Okay.
So Zach, Shelby, one thing we could do, which we've talked about before, but we just never found the time to work on it, is the lightweight M2M specs do have a very simple queue mechanism to do kind of more what you were thinking, like queue up commands going towards the device. And we have thought about just trying to document that in the IETF in core, just to say that, hey, yes, here it is on its own, right? You don't have to do this OMA thing. I think that would be okay. Just keep it simple. But we shouldn't get too close to all these L2 duty cycled listening things. There's tons of them. They're in all these different IEEE standards, and it's kind of part of the networking, right?
And combines fine with that, so there's nothing we need to do.
Yeah. If the networking does it, we're good, right? We're golden. We don't have to do anything. But there could be situations where you do want to do this kind of queue thing. And yeah, I think it would make sense to have a generic spec. As long as we don't go too wild, right? It's going to be simple.
Ari Keränen, I think there's some confusion what exactly the sleepy nodes work. At least how I understand sleepy nodes work is that kind of telling these kind of problems exist if nodes are sleeping. Here are kind of like things that you do to solve them. And PubSub Broker is, one good way we are now working on to solve that. So I don't see these two works conflicting at all. At least I guess the document Peter means is the informational document telling that these kind of problems exist. And kind of generic way to solve this is that you could put your stuff somewhere. So it has nothing to do with L2 stuff, very much to do with higher levels that you are in general not reachable. So I think, even though Barry said why are we doing so many informational documents, I think an information document on that concept would be a good thing. Maybe it's kind of LWIC thing, but it's kind of...
Maybe it's a research group thing?
Or maybe it's a research group thing. Could be. So the venue is open. But I think that kind of information on documents, so that we don't have to put all that stuff in the PubSub Broker draft.
To be clear, I didn't say you shouldn't do informational documents. I said you should decide that when you write the document on the chart.
Okay, so to quote Barry, we can do information documents, but they should decide them based on documents, not clouded with the charter.
Hannes, I think you should also look at the LBIC document, because I think that could potentially be a good place to include that information, because there is some information already there about it. I reviewed an older version of the document. Of course, there's a lot of layer 2 information in there, which I was not too happy about, but there's a lot of other higher layer stuff in there, and the document, as judging from the presentation yesterday, it was updated to even include more information on exactly that problem. So why not look at that and point to the respective documents as informational or as references to, like, for someone who wants to implement any of those. Just a thought.
Okay, so I take home we have a couple of places where we want to fix the proposal here, and we have this informational document on the agenda later during this meeting. We probably have to hurry up a little bit now. So I take it that when I have fixed this text, then I will send a call to the mailing list to comment on it and then hand it over to Barry. Okay. Next, PubSub. So yeah, we're half a minute late, so we have to compress everything by about a factor of 3. Just to remind people, we are the constrained RESTful environments group. So we usually try to do the REST model where the server is the origin of data, which is packaged into a resource. We use something like a GET to get a copy of the resource, or actually a representation of the resource. And in CoAP we have observe to actually request the server to give us new copies, call those notifications, but that's a loaded word, each time the server thinks it's worth it. And this observe stuff needs an initial GET so the server knows where to actually ship those copies. And one thing that always has been said, but we never did, was we might have a management primitive to install the state. We don't necessarily have to use GET to do that. We might have a different way of doing that. So maybe at some point we want to install that. Now, I always run into this strange class of people, the putters. Putters are people who grew up with the device-to-cloud crowd and have devices in their minds where a DNS name is hardwired, and when the device breaks up, it immediately talks with the mothership and just puts to the mothership to get information out there. That is something you can do with CoAP. CoAP doesn't have a problem with that, but it's also not really the thing that we are focusing on here. The protocol is just useful to do that. So the main problem with this is that all the tooling we have here really assumes that the data is with the server. So things like security or management don't work if you don't have a server function on the device. Oh, that's true. Zach.
Yeah, Zach Shelby. So there are alternative architectural models, and I agree. I dislike this one where you're just dumping everything to a mothership, and it's somehow the data's feeding into a black hole, and it's all hard coded. But I think there are valid architectural models where you want the origin server to be somewhere else, and as a device, you're willing to basically delegate the management of that resource on that origin server, right? It is the server. For example, do it to a node on the network which is always on, always available,
yep.
backed up, reliable, right?
Yes.
And that's a completely kind of reasonable design paradigm. Has lots of limitations. It kind of sucks because there's only so much you can do with it, but that's called PubSub. That is how a broker in PubSub works, right? And I think that's okay, right? PubSub's a very well understood, well-known interaction model. It exists, right? What people do today is they invent all kinds of really exotic protocols with their own language and own tooling and own kind of broken security, right, to do this. And what we've seen is that a lot of people in this Internet of Things space want to do a little bit of PubSub. And I think we should help them, right? Do it in the right way, with the right tools, et cetera. And I think that's what the draft we're just about to talk about is about this, right? How do we...
I am happy with people, happier with people doing the wrong thing with CoAP than doing the wrong thing without CoAP.
Good.
But I'm even more happy if they are doing the right thing.
Right, but if we... Yeah, exactly, but let's separate these two things.
Let me take this picture out of the presentation that Michael put out. So this is the putter version of PubSub.
No, it's not. This is PubSub. This is how PubSub works with the broker model mapped onto a REST protocol. Period. This is not like a version of broken put to the mothership, right? This is PubSub.
So how does this guy here learn where to put his stuff?
He just discovered it from the resource directory. That's what the resource directory is there for.
So there is an interaction before that is actually setting up the state here.
Yeah, and tokens suck because you have to pre-configure them, right? I mean, but you have a token, it's pre-configured, you discover where your topic. Your topic's pre-configured, you discover where it is. Your topic is a URI that points to the origin server, right? The topic's a resource. And in order to update a resource on an origin server, what do? Put. Put. I'm updating the resource, right, hosted by an origin server, right? I put. You do not do a notify to update the resource, right? If this was REST, I would agree with you, right? REST, you would do this differently, but this is not REST.
So let me just show you how to do it in REST.
It's not REST, though. It's not REST.
Okay.
It's
Then
PubSub.
go in a different way. Go away.
So, Carsten, maybe before you go there and go into the detail, I think we provide tools.
Yes.
And of course, there's a philosophy behind different communication patterns. And some people prefer some communication patterns and others prefer other ones. But I think if we provide a fair set of a fair amount of tools that people are looking for, which they apparently do, then that will help us in the long run more than telling people, no, your communication model that you have in mind is not the right one. You should actually do it differently. And I think you are a little bit biased in that regard. It's great that you have this sort of emotional attachment to that, but there are other ways to do things, and they're not necessarily bad. They're just different.
Yes, and they have certain very well understood disadvantages.
No, they have different. No. They
Yes,
have
they're
different.
different.
They are different. They have some good properties and others not so good properties, like everything.
So let me just show you how to do this in REST. So you actually need to do a little bit of discovery here. The PubSub guy actually has to talk to the resource directory, and that's what we have the resource directory for. And we actually have to put in an observe here. And when that is done, this put just becomes a notify. And that's it. So it's the origin server is the guy who has the data.
So I'm going to jump in. Robbie Simpson, I think you guys are actually violently agreeing. I think it's just a matter of one of you is thinking about it in a RESTful paradigm, one of you is thinking about it in a PubSub paradigm, and then you're just arguing about which method to use, right? So in a RESTful paradigm, a put is essentially a creation type of verb, right? And it's really a matter of who you're considering the origin and where the resource lives. So I think what Carsten's trying to say is this device, the PubSub client in this diagram, is the resource owner or the origin, and you should not use a put to put it up into the cloud, because put is a create, and you're not modifying the state of a resource, you're just doing kind of the reverse of a get.
Not really a create, it's an update, but yes.
Right. Create,
So
update, yeah.
Where you
Versus
need this model
like,
here is when you actually have a resource here that, for instance, multiple sources are actually contributing to.
Mm-hmm.
That's PubSub.
Yes.
I'm fine with it.
The origin server has to be at the broker.
So this is the whole point. Like, if I was doing REST, right, I would do exactly what you just wrote, right? That PubSub client is not a PubSub client. It is a RESTful server, and this entity in the middle is requesting that and caching it. What you're trying to describe is a web cache, right? It's going and fetching the latest value. It's not what this draft that is going to come next. And by the way, you should write a draft if you want to present your idea, right? Write a draft and present it. I think this is kind of, loading the working group with with a strong opinion, but if you want to do PubSub with an origin server, right? The origin server, sorry, with the broker needs to be the origin server because you have multiple entities working with that resource. Some are updating, some are getting it all the time. And we can't model that with the origin server being on the end device. It just wouldn't be PubSub. And we fought with this for years, right? We did the mirror server work for a long time, and we started out with the same mindset you had, right? And we tried to delegate the origin server, and we did this observes, and it didn't really work, right? We dropped the mirror server works. We couldn't make it work, and it was very confusing, right? Because the other problem, the downside of PubSub is you can't do post and delete. And the problem we had with mirror servers, people said, oh, that's great, I've got this RESTful interface and I want to do post and delete to it, but now it's broken. And we couldn't explain why some methods worked and some didn't. With PubSub, we can. We could say, all you can do with PubSub is publish and subscribe.
Michael should probably come here because it's his slides.
Yeah,
Can I break in a bit for a management interrupt?
Yeah.
We're kind of running short on time. Should we prioritize the things that absolutely have to be done today?
Yes.
Okay. Is this one of them? Okay.
I'm not going to be here tomorrow. So if you put the scribbles back on again. Bum, 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 bum. You will notice you've one too far. All right, but you will notice in that scenario there are actually two origin servers and two resources that are being acted upon. One of which is being served off the PubSub broker, which may or may not be contributed to by the PubSub broker actually going off and pulling resources from somewhere else, and one that's on the PubSub client that's on the left. That's two different things, and that's not actually doing the sorts of things that I think you actually want to do here, which is you want multiple publishers to be able to modify the state of a particular resource. The PubSub broker needs to be the one in charge of that resource. It's the one that's going to be deciding things like what to put there, whether a particular client is authorized to make changes to that particular resource, how to combine perhaps things if you're using patch, which I know you shouldn't be doing. And it's ultimately going to be responsible for the things that go out to the subscribers on that resource. And so, to my mind, adding extra resources in here says something else. This is a private protocol that the PubSub broker has decided to use. And this is something that the PubSub broker could decide to do. But it's not really the sort of thing that we're really trying to describe here. And I totally agree with what Zach was saying on this respect. This is not what I would have expected to see from something. I would have expected to see the original thing, and I think that's perfectly good. Okay. But this is my viewpoint based on my experience, and I think this is the way that you should do that. The only things that you really have to deal with when you talk about one of these things is how you discover where you find those particular resources that relate to different devices, and how you perhaps register in a way that you can establish your own space to publish against, and all those sorts of other things. And that's where I think the real meat comes in.
Matthias Kovac. So what I think it's kind of a similar problem we have with the core interfaces. So there's currently kind of a lot of marketing going on for this PubSub model. That's my impression. And people will think, oh, this is the way how we will solve every problem. So if there's just a single origin of data that will use a put to put it somewhere else, although you could have just used a normal caching proxy that would solve also your sleeping node problem and so on, and you have a clear origin of this information, and you have this URI which resides on the device, which is the only thing that can really change it and update it and has the authority of this information. If you go to there should be multiple devices and they should combine their information, then it's something like a bulletin board you had in the early web, and that's kind of what's happening here. Then you have the resource there, multiple people can communicate their information there, and then it's aggregated. I think we have to make sure that we have the full spectrum here, so that it's not the impression like we had with the interfaces draft, that this is the only way to do it, and now this is the only way to do it to get your data from your small device, but offer some alternatives maybe. Like I think it's kind of implicit information about how these proxies work. So I thought, yeah, this is totally clear then, but people looking at the documents provided by the working group only find this is the way to solve it, because there's no explicit example how to use the proxy in this scenario, for instance. So to have like what we had, these design patterns, so what we discussed for the research group, to actually give the full spectrum of design patterns so that people can actually choose the right design pattern and not the one that is most prominent.
I think it's probably a good idea if the four of you actually get together after the meeting and
yeah,
fix this.
No, that's actually a reasonable suggestion, that we should describe these different methods. And we don't want to give the impression that doing normal REST proxying is not a good idea. 90% of the time it is the right thing to do. Yeah, I don't know, 99% of what we do here is REST, right? We've never done anything like this, so, but you're right, we should document.
Can you do the rest of the presentation in like 3 minutes?
Well,
Go ahead.
I just want to point out one practical aspect of mapping put to publish. We're thinking of this client as a sensor and this client as an application, but if this client is an actuator and this client is an application, there's no way for an observed relationship to be established between the broker and an application. We'll have to use put. So consistently, the idea was to use map publish to put. Yeah, I agree with a lot of the other comments, but there is a practical consideration.
Carrie Lynn, I'm sorry, but I just have to speak up, because I think this was something that we decided to look at in the research group, right? And so I don't object to putting it in the charter as long as it's not fast-tracked before we really have a chance to, inform this thing with opinions.
So, Hannes, what we discussed in context of the research group were a couple of different things. One was to have sort of the education material about REST and so on, and that's great. And to have different, what you called, the design pattern work was discussed in context of the security with the lifecycle work, and I think that's a great idea. But that's sort of the exhaustive approach of describing things, and then you could use all sorts of things with these design patterns. But do we want to wait till we have the research group to look into all these design patterns before we actually make any progress on the solution documents, on this specific solution document?
Darshak Thakur, Cable Labs. So I guess to answer the quick question, no, I don't think we want to wait, because this is very, very important right now. A lot of people are especially working for a couple of other SDOs also. And what he mentioned in terms of them taking the wrong idea and trying to implement things in the wrong way is kind of a real problem right now. So we should try to get this out, and also the explanation of when to use PubSub and when to use the RESTful observe. And I'm actually very, very thankful that somebody finally said that this PubSub, this is not REST. This has been one of the things that I think we even discussed in the meeting earlier. So I think this is a very, very important point that I think needs to be sent out as quickly as possible, because people who are building stuff based on this are actually mixing this up. So I would emphasize it, that's all.
So can you do this in about -3 minutes, please?
Okay, well, I think we've had a lot of the discussion already, but let's go back and I think everyone knows this by now. We're just mapping publish subscribe semantics to using CoAP transactions, defining a broker through which messages are exchanged. And the original draft was really way too involved and confusing, and we simplified it quite a bit. We made the broker a standalone server that's not tied with RD. devices and applications are both clients. That's the thing that really kind of motivates a lot of the reason for mapping put to publish, or publish to put rather. The use of RD being optional, but probably strongly recommended after we review some of the design patterns. It's probably going to be needed in most cases, but there's a degenerate case where you could pre-configure stuff on a little network or whatever. Also, there's some other stuff in there that would like people to review, like the idea was using post to create a topic and put to publish, to update, and then delete to remove topics. So there's a little bit bigger, management set of questions there. And really what we have done is mapped publish to the put operation and subscribe to the observe operation. And then the notifies are still notifies. I think we've been through this already. So some of the discussion that we've been having on the list and on the GitHub issues from this is what is needed, and is this enough to enable sleeping nodes, and what else would be needed if this isn't? Do we need flow control? Because there's no real limitation on how much can be published. You can put, and overload a broker. So what happens? Where do we drop packets? What do we do there? Should there be series retention? Should we allow actual queuing? Is that part of the use case, or just the last? And then we've mostly talked about put versus notify, and then maybe there's some other issues.
Yeah, Martin Thompson, there are other issues. The primary issue is that if how you manage access control on these things, if you're looking for something fairly lightweight, you need some way to identify the guys that are able to publish information to this resource, as opposed to those who can just fetch it. And
ACE is going to do that for us.
You do what you want, but you need it. Data series can be addressed by the server providing link relations to next and previous if you wanted to do that sort of thing. I imagine that would be entirely optional if the server provides a next link and the publisher actually follows the next link and puts the next thing at the next link rather than the current one, then that would give them a way to have a series of these things. But I'm not sure how many people are actually going to use that sort of thing anyway. So
that, you mean that a data series, or?
So you have a collection of things. The only problem with that is the observer relationship gets a little mucky. So it's got some holes.
Derek Atkins, in terms of the authorization, we can leverage the ACE work that's going on. As long as we acknowledge that needs to happen, I think that we can let them think about the hard problems of it and not to necessarily do that work here.
So take-home message, this work is important, we really want to do it, but there's a lot of discussion we have to do, and we should start on the mailing list right now. Okay, so I'm going to be ruthless to Peter and just show this slide, and can we do that tomorrow? Okay, then let's just move on to Jöran. So maybe while he goes to the microphone, one slide that was used in Jose that shows some size numbers from the current work in Jose. So go ahead.
Okay. Next slide, please. Next slide, please.
You have the...
Come on. Okay, so there are a number of points related to this draft. One is about the end-to-end security problem through intermediary devices. So there is this pub/sub broker, for example, how you get security between the publisher and subscriber in terms of integrity and replay protection and encryption. And there are lots of other nodes like forward proxies and store and forward functionality and caching and so on. So, and that discussion we have sort of started in ACE. And then there's other discussion related to, if we now solve this with object security, will the message forward be sufficiently small so that this is a good idea. And that's a discussion started in that sort of more or less was taken over by Jose, or there is this new mailing list on COSE which appeared today, and they are working on a draft charter. And then there is the third question. So some of these problems can be solved on application layer, but some actually requires integration into co-op. And for example, the case when you need to protect the method, like you're not supposed to, an intermediary node should not be able to switch a get to a delete, for example. Or if you need to have a challenge response protocol, so you actually, the client goes through a proxy and a server, and you like to know that it's actually the response that comes back relates to the request. And for those reasons, we actually propose to make some new options for co-op. And there is these options. There is one new option called SIG, essentially containing a secure object, which is a signature, and a new option called ENC, which is essentially indicating the existence of an AAID object. So I briefly go through the estimates of message size, because I missed that in the ACE working group. So the problem we had in the 0.0 version, where we actually proposed to use Jose, was that these message sizes was not very impressive to the constrained node audience here. So the first step is this optimization using CBOR. And then what we did in this draft, what we actually tried to see that if we really, what is the minimum type of header parameters that we need to get encryption, integrity, and replay protection. And then we ended up with a binary format, which is not what we're proposing, but something that this is like the lower bound. How far can we get down? And if we go somewhere in between the 70 and 20, at least the people I talk to find that this is sort of an acceptable type of message expansion. You can read more about this in the draft. So, but the topic for the day is actually how do we integrate this in co-op, and does that make sense to you co-op experts? So the proposal for integrating this, so I'm using Jose now. We know that Jose are too big, but this is sort of just because most people are familiar with JWS and JWE. So if you're the proposal here is that we take a subset of header options and payload from an unprotected co-op message. We put them into a JWS object, we detach the payload, and that is the content of the signature option. And analogously to JWE, slightly more complicated, but still the same type of procedure. We take the encrypted and integrity protected options and together with the payload, and we put that as plain text in a JWE object. We take those options which are only going to be integrity protected as additional authenticated data. We wrap that into a JWE object. And then analogously to what was defined in JWS, we actually detach the integrity protected plain text data. So we get an object which does not contain any redundant information. And then we put that either, if there is no payload in the original co-op message, then we do exactly as in the JWS version, so we actually put it in the option, this JWE. But if there is payload, then we don't want to have a large option because how co-op processes things. So then we instead leave the option empty and we put the JWE into the payload. Yes.
So Martin Thompson, I've embarked on a very similar course at the HTTP layer, which would be largely incompatible with this, but probably contains some of the answers that you're looking for. What we've chosen to do there is define a new content encoding for encryption. And the overhead that we've managed to get it down to is basically the authentication tag plus a header indicating that it's present.
Could you send a pointer to that?
Yeah, I can send a pointer to the list. I think I'm on the list, but if I'm not, well, I soon will be.
So is this duplicating of something you've done already, you're saying?
It's essentially the same thing. I haven't addressed signatures, but I consider that to be a separate problem. So you may have the right solution for signatures. Signatures in HTTP in general has been regarded as a bit of a death trap. So people have tilted that particular windmill many, many times and found that it's an extremely difficult problem to address. Be wary.
So what you're doing AAD essentially?
So the scheme described uses specifically just a SGCM with 128-bit tag.
Okay. Thanks.
And I think that's the entirety of the overhead. Oh, we do padding, so there's an extra byte on the front of it.
Thanks.
Matthias Kovac, quickly. Problem is content encoding is convoluted into the content format in CoAP, so that's not the solution here.
Okay, thanks. So I'm finishing the few slides I have here. So the remaining, this is a general approach. The remaining problem I see, except sanity checking this, is whether this is a correct table of what to integrity protect and encrypt. And we have an argumentation for that. It's basically, Martin, do you want to say something?
Yeah, this is the exact shape of the death trap.
Yes. Death trap.
This is the rat hole that will consume you.
Yeah.
Just warning you. That's all.
Sure.
We just have to decide this.
No,
is what people say, and then 3 years later decide that they can't do it anymore. So this is probably something that you need to be aware of.
But there is sort of a recipe going from the columns on the left to the columns on the right. It's not like saying that we have to think about every option. For example, if they are set to forward, if you notice the U column, there is no cross in a U column, then they should be integrity protected.
Yeah,
and we should encrypt by default. So it's not like
maybe you don't have to deal with
argument.
the swamp that is HTTP, but I suspect that you do, in fact, have these might seem to be obvious, but they're not.
Okay.
Because people use all sorts of interesting things for interesting use cases, and you will be surprised when something breaks, and something will break. I'm not saying that you should stop and abandon ye all hope who enter here, but I think that you have to be aware that even if it looks like it might work, someone will be doing something that will make it break.
Okay. I suppose I can go to my final slide. And so what we've done, we actually tested some of this in the first version. And we didn't use Jose, we used this particular format that we had in the draft, using the Erbium Contiki on a Texas Instruments SDK with ASCCM in software. And this is still work in progress, but the first measurement is what actually is added is a number of additional serializations due to integrity protection, pre-processing of integrity protection and encryption. And the comparison we made was with plain CoAP, so it's not CoAP and DTLS. And it seems that the entire impact in terms of RAM flash processing is due to the symmetric crypto. So we only looked at AAD, by the way, in this. So in comparison with this, there were actually negligible added processing times RAM and flash. So it's essentially much less order than symmetric crypto doing this type of changes.
Okay. Thank you. So I have one final slide maybe. I think for this working group, this is a really interesting thing, and Martin has already warned us. It looks simpler at first look than it actually is. So I think it's a pretty significant extension to CoAP, but I'm much more optimistic than Martin that we can put it off because CoAP is simpler than HTTP. I think the interesting part here is this goes through proxies. So it's simply more general than what we have today in DTLS. And what this kind of means is that once this stuff starts to work, it is going to de-emphasize DTLS. And we have to be very cognizant about that. So apart from that, I think the object security is likely to be done in COSE. The whole issue, where do the security associations come from, we can completely ignore because ACE is doing all our homework there for us. So the only problem remains the CoAP extensions. We need to make this actually work across proxies.
Carsten, just wonder if you announced the IoT security meeting tonight?
Oh yes, I think I did it at the beginning, but let me repeat that. The network security people will meet at 7 p.m. in the room Pavilion, which is one story up from here. So if you're interested in security, you can go there. Thank you.
Could I say a final thing about this? It's just a complement to DTLS. You could use them in parallel. That's fine. You could have DTLS.
Yeah, you know how things are going.
So it's not actually
when
replacing.
When you have a new toy, the old toy gets out of fashion.
And where are the blue sheets?
Yeah, thank you for doing this. Have a good flight home.
No, that's the wrong one. There are two more somewhere in the room.